Good afternoon. I'm at Zero Project. My name is Kathryn Johnson. I'm from St. Cloud State University in Minnesota, and I am with my colleague Amanda. You want to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon. My name is Amanda KRAUS. I'm at the University of Arizona in Tucson, Arizona in the southwestern United States. Very happy to be at the Zero Project Conference.
So today we'd like to talk to you about accessibility and inclusion in higher education. And I'm really honored to be with Amanda because honestly, her university is one of the models in the United States that all of us can learn from. So today we're going to be able to share from the expertise and knowledge of Amanda and her experience, not only in the academic position that you hold, but as an individual with a disability who went to higher education in the United States. So first, can you start just sharing your story a little bit, your experience of access to higher education when you were a student back in the day?
Not that long. Back in the day, yeah. I went to college in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which was a fairly challenging city. I use a wheelchair. I'm sitting in my wheelchair right now. Pittsburgh has a lot of hills, and it snows and rains, and often at the same time. So I started college in the late 90s, so just a few years post Americans with Disabilities Act, so post ADA, and I think, nobody really knew what we were doing yet. So I kind of learned not to request accommodations. Yeah, I mean, there wasn't a formalized process to do so. Everything was kind of one-off.
Wow.
And so, I had a fine experience at school. I ended up going on to graduate school, which is how I ended up at the University of Arizona, where I did my master's and my doctorate. And that was a completely different experience because the University of Arizona has a very long history of disability resources. The southwestern U.S., Tucson specifically, is just naturally more accessible. It's flat and dry. It's the desert. So as a chair user, it was great. And I didn't know access could be so good. I was used to growing up on the East Coast, Northeast, outside of New York City, Pennsylvania, much older part of the country in terms of architecture, a lot more weather. So the University of Arizona, really kind of just alleviated a lot of the burden around access. So not just the place, but also the resources. So it's been kind of a journey for me as a disabled individual, having gone to school there and now working there in disability resources. But that was really my first introduction to the disability community, including disability access.
And I just look to you as one of the experts. She's spoken for our university before, too, and we were very honored with that. But as far as what you've learned on your journey to get to you to where you are today, what advice do you have for universities to have really a transformative shift in how they approach access and inclusion on college campuses?
Yeah, thank you for the question, because there needs to be a shift. I think that even with the best of intentions, we have been trained, many of us explicitly trained, to respond to disability access or barriers to access through a compliance lens, which means we're considering disability a liability, right?
Yes,
If we don't respond, that person could get hurt. They could sue us. We're going to get in trouble. It's going to cost a lot of money. So what do we need to do to be compliant, right? And I should say, in this international venue, the United States is very, very lucky to have a decades-long history of federally required disability access. And I'm grateful for that, and I benefit from that. And there is a way in which a compliance mindset keeps us stuck. Because when we're just looking to make, the least amount of kind of effort, if you will, and just how do I maintain my compliance, check the box, often something will be accessible, but not very good. Right, or not very similar, not shared. And I can say that being disabled my whole life, right, a lot of the access when I was, especially on the East Coast of the U.S., it was that way, which wasn't very good, right? So, you might go in the front door and I'm gonna have to look for my way around the side or the back, regardless of time of day, weather. That's an example of something that is compliant, but not inclusive. And so there is a way to consider disability access and disability inclusion where we can start with inclusion and equity in mind. Because when we put an equitable solution in place, when we proactively plan for diversity in our spaces, in our classes, in our workplaces, we're probably going to meet our compliance obligations, because universal design is good design, right? Inclusive design is good design. Everyone benefits from that. And that's also just a friendlier way, I think, to think about our communities, right?
Yeah.
Because in higher education, we do work quite hard to create welcoming, inclusive communities for diverse people. But yet, disability is somehow still kind of over there, right? We're going to work on inclusion and community over here, and the ADA will take care of disability. And that's inaccurate, right? The ADA is there, it's very important. And, right, I mean, a lot of things need to be true. We have to hold them true at the same time. So we can be concerned with community and inclusion and ADA compliance by starting from a place where we're prioritizing inclusion and universal access.
This morning, I don't know if anyone saw the keynote by President Bobby Cordano from Gallaudet University, and she shared about the bilingual approach that they have implemented as a university for the deaf community globally. And one of the things that really stuck out to me was working to promote a sense of belonging, and how often our students with disabilities may end up being very isolated and not a part of groups or feel that sense of community. Can you share how you've really worked to advance that sense of belonging for students?
Right, absolutely. You know, thinking back on my own experience, that sentiment did not exist when I was growing up and when I was in college. So, you know, and that could have been me, although I believe that just as our national consciousness or international consciousness, we've evolved. And back then, we didn't talk about disability community. We didn't really talk about belonging. We didn't even really talk about ableism until a few years ago, really explicitly. You know, so disabled students, let's say, are admitted to universities by the same standards as non-disabled students. They are held to all the same standards as non-disabled students, yet their choices are limited in the dorm room they can live in, the classrooms they can, you know, have their classes in, the schedules they can have, et cetera, et cetera. So that's really where I think we can start to look at community and belonging. So how do you say, welcome to our university, but you have to do all these different things from everybody else, right? You're going to have to make a request and wait, and we'll see what we can do, right? That's confusing, right? Because everyone deserves their space at the university, and that could be as a student or as an employee. Everyone's earned their right to be there. So, you know, part of belonging is really anticipating diversity and anticipating difference in how we think of our teaching, our classrooms, our spaces, our events, our workplaces. We want to think about the widest possible audience so that everyone feels a part of that community, not apart from it. So, you know, and that's where, again, I think we're very interested, and I don't know how good we are in higher education, American higher education, at kind of diversity and inclusion, but we try. But with disability, it is often different. And that is, I think that's really an issue of values.
Right.
And issues of equity or inequity that we need to really be getting at.
Also, earlier, when we talk about a sense of belonging, earlier on the panel that you were just on, regarding access in higher education, a young woman from Jordan raised the question about, what about international students? And how do we really advance inclusive educational exchanges, either short-term or degree-seeking international students? Can you talk about your international students with disabilities and how you really work to welcome them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have, you know, I work at our Disability Resource Center where all access is centralized for students, employees, et cetera. So one of our, you know, close partners are Study Abroad and Arizona International, working, you know, all over the world essentially to provide Arizona education, right? University of Arizona education. You know, I think that international students are kind of thrilled when they arrive at the U of A, and I would say that that's probably true at most American campuses where access has been a priority for many years. Where I think that, you know, from just our American perspective, sometimes we can take things a bit for granted, right? And so, I think when you're not used to having a pretty high baseline of access, that when you realize lots of things have been considered in terms of the physical space or academic accommodations or places to live on and around campus, it makes your experience obviously much, much smoother, much more of a seamless transition. So I think that international students are just delighted when they get to campus. The flip side of that is we, of course, encourage American students at our university to study abroad, and that can be very challenging given the different legal frameworks. So, we do the best we can, and we try to partner with campuses that are willing to make changes and accommodations, but it's tricky, right? And so that, again, goes to really highlight how the legal framework shapes our socio-political or socio-cultural understanding of disability.
Right. I definitely am very passionate about educational exchanges and encouraging students to go. It's part of what we really value as inclusive diplomacy, that we can offer not only the educational exchange experience for the student themselves, but then for the community in which they have their exchange experience.
Right.
And it's a win-win
Right.
when we are inclusive of our educational exchange programs. So we're getting down to the wire of this lovely time together. What resources exist for universities that really want to up their level of accessibility for students with disabilities? Could you highlight some resources that you might know of?
Right, sure. I would love to share the Association on Higher Education and Disability, which is based in the U.S. but offers resources for international universities and really sets best practice and standards for disability access in higher education. I shared a book chapter that was recently published that really describes the University of Arizona's model and reconceptualizing concepts of access.
Right.
And that's in the Handbook of Student Affairs Administration. So hopefully we can get at future student affairs and student services professionals who are interested in working with students. And Kathy, we're trying to revitalize an international network for campuses, institutions around the world to come together, connect, share best practice, learn from one another, identify funding sources and opportunities to share information and resources so that on their own campuses, right, we'll all continue to be working toward a higher level of access.
Great. And so that organization is called the GUDEN Network, the Global University Disability and Inclusion Network, that was launched at the Harkin Summit in 2019 in Paris. And then we all know what happened in our world. COVID hit. And so we're really working to revitalize that network to serve as a resource hub and a knowledge hub and innovation hub for universities. And so we encourage you to reach out to us. Again, I'm from St. Cloud State University. Amanda?
University of Arizona.
And we partner together and are really working to embrace the Zero Project community and the universities that are involved in this community to bring higher education to the forefront of the discussions that happen at these events that annually. So please reach out to us. And last closing thought, I know we're going on the 1-year anniversary of losing our dear friend Judy Human.
Yes.
What would you say her greatest comment would be about access to higher education?
Judy would have a lot to say about access to higher education. I think she would say what's taking so long.
Yes, we still have
given
ways
that
to
she
go.
spent her entire life,
Right.
trying to push for higher levels of access. But, I think that she would probably try to distill that when we design things well for disabled people, we're designing things well for everyone. And ultimately, disabled people deserve to be a part of the community.
Right.
So if we start with that, equitable approach, universal design approach, I think she would encourage institutions down that path so that they're becoming inclusive for all.
Right. And I know at St. Cloud State, we're really working to embrace students with disabilities from any country. We have a new certificate in deaf leadership and advocacy, and we're looking for students who are deaf and have a very unique program in that we realize that often there doesn't exist an opportunity for learning English to pass the TOEFL, one of our requirements. So we've waived that requirement, and we know that sign language is a language that will be accessible when they enter into our campus. So we encourage young deaf leaders from different communities around the world to come to our campus and be a part of our certificate in deaf leadership and advocacy.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. This was a wonderful opportunity, Amanda.
Thank you
I
very
love working
much.
with her.
Thanks, everyone.
And thanks to the Zero Project for hosting this session.
Thanks.
Good? Very good.